All right. You know what? I'm going to say that if you haven't had this crew of independent analysts at your event, is it really an event? We are our schedules have been uh, chocked full of events later. We were just talking about this in the green room that there are so many events going on. There's so much travel, and we are going to try and cover as many of those events that's relevant to our audiences, our collective audiences, over the next few weeks as possible. So we have some great content scheduled. We have Maribel, Tim, Larry, welcome back to. I think we're going to do this often enough that we probably need to name it. Any suggestions?
Tech talk time. I don't know. We'll think about this,
We'll
right?
work on that.
Yeah.
We'll come up with something.
So, as we're thinking about names, let's talk about the big conference from this past week. There was a lot going on from Nutanix Next to Tim, you went to Informatica World. There was just a ton of conferences. But I think the biggest of the conferences were, at least from a company perspective, was IBM Think. IBM, the cloud and AI company. I think I was there, and I want to say IBM, the AI, in some other stuff company. It was mainly about AI. We'll get into all of the things that I'm excited about, some of the things that you folks witness from afar, and I'll try and fill some gaps on where we're at. But let's take a high level tour of the conference and what you folks thought. Let's start with Larry. You're the most. You seem like the most energetic right now. You're fresh off a trip from India, and you're bright and bushy tail. What did you think of the announcements? What stuck out to you? What fell short?
Yeah, see, I look at IBM as one of the leaders in AI back in 2008, 2009, when they beat the Jeopardy champion. What IBM missed doing at that time was monetizing it in a fruitful way that the company can actually make a difference. And they tried. They tried in healthcare, they purchased healthcare companies and sold it off. But what I found here coming in, they're going after being an arms dealer for companies wanting to put their own models and provide the resources to train models. What's the next, data, what's the next governance. Those three fill in the need for companies saying, I'm not going to depend on a public model and I'm going to do my own thing. We are seeing that in law firms. I mean, I don't know if you have heard of Harvey and Harvey AI, that have very specific models they're building for different law firms, being used very large, got a huge amount of funding. So that vertical level of ability to train models and do something that is governed, IBM is going to be a good steward to help a company on that path. The other thing that IBM has, which is now being promoted more and more, is IBM Consulting that can come and take all this technology and make it relevant for companies. Having said that, they have a partnership with NVIDIA, that they're going to start bringing in, that you can train your models in. So those are all the good things from IBM that I heard. What I don't see is there are going to be startups that want to build on AI, and will those startups build on IBM? And you guys can correct, or Keith, you have been there. Why would a startup use IBM to build something? And will IBM be able to support a startup that is spending maybe only $100 to train a model on some other platform? And will IBM even have the interest in going after those startups who's starting at that amount of spend and come in there? So for a large company needing advice, all the tools to go to the AI model, when every company is saying I'm either in a wait and see and I'm, maybe kicking the tires, IBM may be a good company for them to go to.
So,
For start.
Larry, I will respond with that inquiry with one kind of anecdote, which was the afternoon keynote on the second day was all about AI, standing room only for an afternoon keynote, and they had the founding of Hugging Face
Right.
on for a
Mhm.
majority of the time, and that was an extremely well received in that IBM friendly world of the conference area. You know how we're in the conference bubble. People are IBM customers and they love it. I really would love to hear if one of you want to comment on how you perceive that session being afar and not in that romanticized bubble of a conference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's
Yeah,
funny.
Maribel, let's hear from you.
That's Yeah, just quick. That's the only one I actually listened to from the keynote. It was promoted on LinkedIn, and had the invitation. I said, okay, let me listen to that. Yeah, but you're right, Keith. Hugging Face was a little bit of a differentiator, in going towards startups. Yeah, go ahead, Maribel.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like Hugging Face is definitely having a moment right now, right? So if you're not doing OpenAI, you're doing Hugging Face and working with them on that. And I did get a good chuckle out of him talking about like the Woodstock of open source event that they just kind of had, which was pretty funny. But a few things have happened, right? So Think always was one of these more AI driven events. Two things that they brought to it that I thought were kind of interesting. One was they brought the notion of hybrid cloud data to AI, right? So we have a challenge as organizations that people have data everywhere. So one of the things that they did talk about that I thought was kind of interesting was people having data everywhere and how do you deal with that from accessing the data, from governing the data. So I thought that was an interesting angle that they brought to it that they hadn't brought to it before. It was also interesting to see like the real big return of Watson. There have been a lot of discussions, with some of the things that happened both around their consulting business and around Watson Healthcare and other things that people are kind of like, well, what's going on with Watson? And now all of a sudden Watson's back, right? The third thing I would say is all of us have listened to a bunch of discussions about what's going on with generative AI from Microsoft, from Google, even from AWS. On to Larry's point, marketplaces, I think, are going to be big, right? So AWS is definitely going to take it from the marketplace point of view because they don't have a lot of their own applications. Microsoft and Google are trying to anchor some of that around their applications. Since IBM isn't a real big application company, I think they really went deep in on the tooling and the tooling to do AI. And that kind of made sense from a positioning standpoint. One of the things that I think we've all discussed, maybe in another session or certainly together, is how difficult this is to do and how people really need to build the equivalent of the software development lifecycle, but in AI. And in AI, not just for machine learning, which was ML ops, but also AI in terms of generative AI. So I think we got a lot of interesting toolkit discussion around that. They talked a lot about governance. We have to kind of figure out, not having been there. I know Keith, you had some more direct discussions around that. I was at another event at that time, at the Intel Vision event, which was very close actually. One of the things that they've always been looking at is how do you do things like they did an AI 360 explainability several years ago as sort of an open source thing. And now we're starting to see the evolution of that in terms of how do we think about trust and models. So the biggest issues that we hear enterprise leaders talking about right now is not understanding if they use the big, large foundation models, if that is going to have either issues around copywritten material or trust of the data, biases in the data, lots of issues around the data. So I think some of the tooling that IBM talked about really spoke to those concerns. I also think Microsoft had some really interesting discussion around governance as well. We've heard less governance discussion from Google. I think in their I/O they talked a little bit more about that, but in their original announcements it wasn't as strong of a play. So the long and the short from my perspective as an outsider looking in on what happened at Think was that they really tried to address what they were hearing as real business concerns related to AI. So instead of it just being like, oh, AI is amazing and you can do all these things, it's like, well, let's talk about how we make the AI work. And we can argue whether or not we're really detailed at that, but at least we're at the beginning of trying to address some of the real issues.
Tim?
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of wrap on it. From my perspective, not being at Think, and I was at Informatica World and also Zendesk Relate this week, but comparing and contrasting a little bit of what you were saying, Maribel, is that in the past, Think has been this very infrastructure focused, tools focused show. And you're right, IBM historically has not necessarily been perceived as that application provider, right? It's been further down the value chain, still critical. But when Watson Gen 1 came out, um, it was an amazing set of tools that you could tap into. But the reason why it really struggled to get off the ground was that enterprises didn't have the education and experience and capability to really capitalize and ingest it and take advantage of it. Only the biggest companies were able to have the girth and the expertise to be able to do that. And so I think that that's great from the standpoint of here's an amazing tool set, that being Watson, but it just wasn't easily consumed. And I think that was a miss for IBM in the past. Fast forward to this week, and we're talking about Watson X, and you talk about the governance. There's the data component, the AI component. I think they've really learned from that mistake and really tried to make this more consumable for the average enterprise. And to me, that's a huge, huge plus for IBM. IBM has always had to think about, how do we get beyond our base? How do we bring in more customers into the fold than just the existing IBM base of customers? And I think when you start to take something as sophisticated and rich as Watson and you start to break it up into components that are more easily digestible by an enterprise, especially in this day and age where there are a number of tools out there that are looking to do this, um, it's it's really kind of a plus for IBM because they have that expertise. They've been down this path for some period of time, more so than their competitors, and they can bring that to the table for the average enterprise to be able to consume. I think governance and policy is going to be a big issue for enterprises. It is today, and going forward, it's going to get more complicated as you start to think about privacy and regulatory and compliance requirements, not just at a nation state level, but then looking within those nation states, like just within the United States, you've got regulations in New York and California, et cetera. And so being able to automate that around the data and acceptable use of data is going to be incredibly important. And Informatica really kind of jumped on this because they're all about data. That is their thing. But we also have to look at, how does this kind of start to move up the value chain so that the average person can start to use it, and it's not just this super high-tech, sophisticated tool that only the most sophisticated customers can use. I think IBM's made a great step in the right direction. I'll be really interested to see kind of how this plays out, and especially as you were saying about hybrid cloud, how does that kind of layer in with this as we go forward?
Yeah, so I am. I'm gonna if you work from IBM and you're in the analyst session about hybrid cloud, and I stood up and asked the question. You know, I'm gonna borrow a little bit of my spiel when I ask my question, which is IBM, the hybrid cloud and AI company. It's kind of like when I'm listening to my friends, the Cube, and they say the leader in uh, coverage. I think we'll challenge them on that in a little bit, though. But I think one of the things that I found very interesting about the conference overall, there was very little hybrid cloud conversation directly that did not include AI. This was a AI conference. Make no mistake about it. IBM is betting heavily on it, while Arvind, the CEO of IBM, by the way, take there was a outstanding AMA with him for analysts from start to finish. There was no opening comments. It was just questions from analysts, and it is by far one of the best AMAs I've had with a CEO of a major tech company. But I digress. Again, this was a conference that was about. Uh, this was a conference that was about AI and how AI will impact the hybrid infrastructure. This was my first combined IBM and Red Hat event, so I didn't know what to expect overall. And I was fairly disappointed in the level of conversation around hybrid cloud. I've been covering IBM for almost a year now. It's a well kept secret. Their hybrid cloud solution is a well kept secret. So much so that one of the most interesting parts of their portfolio is this IBM Cloud satellite offering. Think of Azure Stack or Outpost or Anthos. It is their competitive offering to those solutions. And it on paper may be the best solution out there for most use cases. If you can think about taking an AWS control plane and putting it in Google Cloud or Azure or in your data center without buying hardware, this is what this is. You can take IBM's cloud and run it in your infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is another public cloud provider, a colo, or your private infrastructure, is you're able to do that. And I asked them the big question, which was, well, what's the minimum commitment and what's the stand up time? If you're standing up in another cloud, the speed at which you can get your Terraform to run is how long it takes to bring up the service. And then once you bring it back down, you stop being billed for it. It's truly a cloud solution. That's if IBM Cloud itself has all of the services that you want for it. So overall, it was a great show. I ran into business users, not just technologists. I think I sat at a table with a woman. I told her that I was a infrastructure professional, and she was, "Oh, you build manufacturing tools?" I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 not that kind of infrastructure person. I am an IT infrastructure person." And she didn't even know what that meant. So that was a great indicator that they had uh, the right audience there to talk about the outcomes associated. Now, I think I want to open this up for general conversation, and we just talk about questions you may have for me around whether it's Watson X. I know what the X stands for, and any of the AI announcements, etc. While not a data or AI guy, absorbed way more about AI foundational models versus LLMs versus spatial geo models, etc. I am now a AI expert or talking head expert at least.
I love it. So, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting that I think Larry alluded to in his opening remarks um, is this concept of we've got the big foundational models that we talk about, like the GPT 3, 4, uh, but there's also other models, and IBM has actually been it talked about its data cards and, the whole pipeline of doing things. And I'm just wondering, did you get a sense that they were really, you know, pushing some of their models for the enterprise to pick up?
No, I think they really highlighted. If I hear the term hugging face one more time, I will like go hug
Just the
someone
phrase.
because they really wanted to drive home whether you're buying a model from IBM, building a model, or bringing a model. they want to be your home for uh, either training or using inference on that model. They want to be as hybrid as possible. So much so that you look at Watson X AI. That is where you bring those other models from to adopt. I think what they wanted to drive home is that the best, that better together story. When you use an all IBM solution, you're going to get the breadth of Watson.ai, Watson.data, Watson X.ai, Watson X.data, and Watson X.governance. You get the best of all worlds, but any one of those portions of the platform can be separated out, used as standalone. You don't have to have an all IBM solution.
See, this is what I think is really different between some of the positioning that we've heard from, say, Microsoft and Google, where they talk about a lot about, what they're creating from a model perspective and what developers could have access to and what types of intelligence will be available. So it's actually interesting. And it's also I think Amazon also has a very different take on it. So this is really an interesting time in AI to see how each of the different hyperscalers are trying to play to one of their strengths and see, what they can push forward with their customer base.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of stuck out in my head is when you talk about hybrid cloud and you think about it from a customer standpoint for a minute, there are a number of companies that are touting they have the best hybrid cloud solution on the market, right? So now IBM's there. We could say the same about HPE. HPE's been talking about hybrid cloud for some period of time. They've even been talking about AI. I think it's a different data set that they're looking at versus what we're talking about here. But then you look at the hyperscalers, the Google, Microsoft, Amazon, um, and they all have the infrastructure piece of it. But Keith, one of the pieces that stood out here for coming out of Think was the AI pieces sat on top of it for these other companies, but it seems like there's more of an integration between those two conversations coming out of IBM more so than some of the other alternatives. Is that part of what you were taking away on the ground?
Yeah, and I wanted to tease this out because when I heard the umbrella term Watson X, especially the Watson X data, I really had a adverse reaction when I first heard about what I thought it was. Watson X data. When they introduced it at the keynote stage, they introduced it as a open data store for data. And I'm thinking, oh, as an IT infrastructure person, that's exactly what I needed. Is yet another data store to solve my data store sprawl issue.
A
Exactly what
data
I was
store for a
asking for.
data store.
Yeah, data store for my data store. And
They call that metadata, by the way.
that's
My
very
time
bad.
is done here.
So
Ba-dum-bum.
what what IBM took pains in doing, and when I went and talked to their chief scientist around AI and the owner of the Watson X brand. Watson X, the X stands for scale. So Watson times whatever the thing you're going to do. .ai, which is the models, etc. .data, which is the data lake, and then dot governance, which is the governance around the data itself. Each one of these components, whether how you consume it ultimately with .ai and OpenShift, is something that you don't need to start with IBM to get the advantage of, which I thought was really, really smart. The other smart thing is that uh, uh, they're deprecating the Watson Studio, which, to your point, Tim, was the big learning curve, and Watson.ai is replacing that. So they're resetting this. Well, this idea that using Watson is hard or Watson X is hard. They're focusing on a single way to do this across platforms, whatever you choose from the underlay. And I don't think
Yeah.
this is something that I've heard from other cloud providers, that you're able to separate their AI tooling from their infrastructure itself. So when you're looking at what AWS is doing, what Google is doing, it's a holistic story and not necessarily a story around Lego.
Did
Yeah, one
Go
thing
ahead.
which I want to just bring up over here was IBM can learn internally of what they can do with AI and then start using it for providing value to customers. Because when you finally look at what are customers looking for from AI, they want to get productivity gains. When Arvind, about week or two ago, said we can not hire for 8K jobs or 8,000 jobs, it made some news and shook some things saying, hey, what are you going to lay off 8,000 people? And he said that we're going to lose people through attrition, but we're not going to replace them. And we are going to now be in a 27,000 or 30,000 organization, be able to eliminate 8K jobs over the next 3 to 5 years through attrition. Everybody missed that through attrition point and just said he's going to lay off 8,000 people and use it. But that's not the point. The point is now they're going to learn from internally what can they do for back office processes to automate that with AI and then make that available to customers that you can improve your productivity, especially a large amount of value that can be multiplied, just like you said, scale. When you think about a retail or a fast food company, now there are more people talking about fast food companies, replacing that drive-through with AI. That little bit of efficiency you gain can have a significant value on the bottom line. So I think that's something that IBM might be able to provide value in the future. I don't know what you guys think about Arvind's comments and whether that's something that can be used.
So he expanded on those comments. Give credit where credit is due. Dan Newman followed up on this comment from Bloomberg during his Bloomberg interview, and Arvin gave us the rest of the line that Bloomberg left out. It's their discretion to leave it out or not, which is he believes that IBM will double in size as a direct result. So
Yes.
the jobs that are destroyed will be replaced with better jobs. There's a lot of just social and uh, politics around what that means, like what type of jobs they'll be replaced with, and who's has access to those jobs. But I think it is undeniable that when you increase productivity historically, you increase opportunity. When you abstract away the complexity, you allow people to do more things. One of the tongue in cheek things that happened was one of the executives shared a story about how a auto shop is using generative AI to reduce or increase their productivity by 25%, and how the husband that was using the generative AI helped his chemistry professor's teacher use it to create tests, exams for her classroom, and how this non-intuitive direction of the kind of blue collar workers taking hold of this technology and teaching the white collar workers to use it was pretty quick. And I
Yep.
know we're coming up on our usual cap. We might end up going over about a couple of minutes. The one thing I did want to stitch together, which I don't know if I think intuitively I believe it, but I haven't really thought this through is how AI will drive the hybrid cloud. And they gave a lot of examples of data being collected at the edge, at the data center, not in the cloud, and bringing the entire tool set to the edge. So when you think about satellite, which will bring me managed OpenShift, which brings me OpenShift AI, and all of the tooling I need to process the data at the edge, IBM has a compelling story there. So
Yeah.
let's do some final thoughts. Let's go in reverse order. Tim, let's start with you.
I'll just build on what you just said. I do think that as enterprises really kind of start to move up the value chain, move up that stack, right, and move closer to trying to gain those insights as quickly as possible, they will want automation and want a closer tie into the infrastructure and the underpinnings of the technology. So I just have a question to ask. I don't care how the system automagically works to make that answer come about. And the data may reside all over the place. And so we have to think about the integration pieces, but I think the underlying infrastructure there too, those are going to have to come closer together than what we're seeing. And so I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing coming out of Think. And I think that we're seeing this, as I mentioned, Informatica is really going gangbusters in this space, but there are a few others that are also trying to connect the dots there. So I think that's the real opportunity for these companies, is to start to consolidate and tie up some of these functions to make them more consistent in the way that they operate and more approachable as a tool for enterprises.
Maribel.
Okay. All right. As I mentioned earlier, I really like that IBM is actually pulling together a nice set of toolkits that meet with, what enterprise issues are. But the rubber doesn't meet the road until you actually connect that to data. So what I'd really like to see is, the kinds of partnerships that IBM is going to have with different applications or other things where, the reality is we talk a lot about AI. AI strategies are really difficult to deploy. And the ones that I think will get deployed first are when you can anchor them to some application or data source and try to do something different. Like, what does that generative AI work on? So until we see a little more of that out of IBM, I think it will be a really nice, interesting set of offerings, but won't get traction until we see it actually connect with the app ecosystem.
And Larry.
Yeah, I think the lack of skills in enterprises is still a real thing for making AI work. And IBM, with their consulting and their partnerships with other public cloud providers like Amazon and others, can help them give a customer a story or a narrative that can be actually implemented and you can gain value out of. So I think this would be an interesting thing to see where IBM can play a role.
Yeah, and I'm still processing my overall thoughts from the conference. I'm unlikely to write about a single vendor, and I like to expand out kind of these industry wide views as well as you three are as well. What does IBM think announcements and approach mean for the overall industry? Where are the challenges? How are customers trying to solve this? Because not every customer is an IBM customer. And I think it helps to understand why folks are not IBM customers and why maybe some should or shouldn't be. You want to learn about our individual brands. You can visit each one of our websites, which will be in the description below. All of us are fairly active on social media. Our Twitter handles and LinkedIn profiles are both in the description of this video and in the show notes if you're listening to it as a podcast. Talk to you next episode of insert title of show somewhere.
Whatever we're going to call this.
Whatever we're gonna call it.
Excellent.
All right, folks. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Till
Thank
next
you.
time.
Thanks.
Ciao.